When Serena walked into her sister's wedding, she expected family love and celebration. Instead, she faced the worst humiliation of her life in front of 200 guests. But what nobody knew was that her quiet husband wasn't just any man, and his response would shock everyone into silence. Let me tell you about Serena Williams Chen. And no, not the tennis champion. Though this Serena has her own kind of strength that's about to blow your mind. At 32, she's everything you'd want in a successful woman. Sharp, accomplished, and the kind of marketing director who can turn a failing campaign into a $1 million success story. But here's what made Serena different from everyone else in her family. She never felt the need to flaunt what she had. While her colleagues drove luxury cars and flashed designer handbags, Serena chose simplicity. She lived in a comfortable but modest home, shopped at regular stores, and honestly, if you met her at a coffee shop, you'd think she was just another hardworking professional trying to make it in the world. What you wouldn't know, what nobody in her family knew, was that this choice to live simply wasn't about money. It was about something much deeper, something that would soon turn her entire family's world upside down. Now, Serena's relationship with her younger sister Jasmine had always been complicated. You know how it is with siblings sometimes. There's love there, real love, but it's tangled up with years of comparison and competition. Jasmine had always lived in Serena's shadow, watching her older sister excel in school, land great jobs, and seemingly have it all together. But what ate at Jasmine the most was that despite all of Serena's success, she seemed to settle for less in life. At least, that's how Jasmine saw it. Everything changed when Jasmine got engaged to Richard, a wealthy real estate developer who owned half the luxury condos in their city. Suddenly, Jasmine had something Serena didn't, or so she thought. The engagement ring alone cost more than most people's cars, and Jasmine made sure everyone knew it. She'd found her golden ticket, her chance to finally be the sister who had made it big. The wedding planning became Jasmine's obsession. We're talking about $150,000 budget, flowers flown in from Ecuador, a dress that cost more than some people's annual salary. Every decision was designed to show the world that Jasmine Williams was no longer the little sister trailing behind. She was the one who had truly arrived. And with every extravagant choice, every expensive detail, came little digs at Serena's lifestyle. "Oh, you wouldn't understand," Jasmine would say when discussing venues. "You and David are more simple in your tastes." Or, "Don't worry about contributing to the bar tab, Serena. I know marketing doesn't pay like real estate." These comments, delivered with a sweet smile that never quite reached her eyes, were like paper cuts, small but constant reminders of where Jasmine now saw herself in the family hierarchy. When Serena offered to help financially with the wedding, Jasmine actually laughed. Not a kind laugh, but the sort of dismissive chuckle you give when a child offers to help with grown-up problems. "That's sweet of you, but Richard and I have it covered," she said. Then added with a pointed look, "Maybe you should save your money for when you and David can finally afford to upgrade your lives." As the wedding approached, Jasmine assigned Serena the most embarrassing bridesmaid duties she could think of. While the other bridesmaids were tasked with organizing the bachelorette party at an upscale spa, Serena was put in charge of assembling wedding favors, a job typically given to teenage cousins or family friends. The message was clear: you're family, so you have to be included, but don't expect to be treated like you matter. What none of them knew was that quiet, humble David Chen, who always seemed to fade into the background at family gatherings, was watching every slight, every dismissive comment, every moment his wife's family treated her like she was less than she was, and he was keeping a very careful tally. The rehearsal dinner was held at Meridian, one of those restaurants where the waiters wear white gloves and the wine list reads like a luxury car catalog. Jasmine had chosen it specifically because she knew it would intimidate anyone who wasn't used to that level of opulence. As we walked in, I could feel the weight of judgment from Richard's family, his parents, siblings, and their perfectly polished spouses, who looked at us like we were exhibits in a museum they weren't sure they wanted to visit. David and I found our assigned seats, and I noticed immediately that we'd been placed at the far end of the table, away from the important family members. Richard's mother, a woman who wore her wealth like armor, made sure to mention within our earshot how refreshing it was to meet people who were so grounded. The way she said it made it sound like a disease. When David quietly introduced himself as working in hospitality, I watched her eyes glaze over with the kind of polite disinterest reserved for people she'd immediately categorized as irrelevant. The comments started small. Richard's brother asked David about his little tech job, mishearing when David mentioned he worked with technology systems. "Oh, like computer repair?" he said with a patronizing smile. "That's nice. Steady work, I'm sure." David just nodded, sipping his water, while I felt my chest tighten with frustration. He was being so patient, so kind, when these people were treating him like he was invisible. But the worst part wasn't how they treated David. It was how my own family began to pile on. My mother, who should have been defending us, instead started making apologetic jokes about how not everyone is cut out for business success. She actually said that about her own daughter while sitting next to strangers who were already looking down on us. The bridesmaid dress fitting the next morning was my first real taste of what Jasmine had planned for me. While the other bridesmaids wore elegant, flattering dresses in a beautiful sage green, mine was a completely different shade, a sickly yellow-green that made my skin look washed out. "Oh, that's perfect for you, Serena," Jasmine said, circling me like a predator. "It's so unique. You've always been the one who stands out, right?" Her friends, women I'd known since high school, who now acted like they'd never shared sleepovers and secrets with me, giggled behind their hands. "It's actually kind of brave," one of them said, choosing such a bold color. They knew exactly what they were doing. And so did I. I was being turned into the wedding's comic relief, the sister who would stand out for all the wrong reasons. Wedding day morning arrived with all the chaos you'd expect from a $150,000 production. While the other bridesmaids were pampered with professional hair and makeup, I was assigned to help with setup tasks, arranging centerpieces, directing vendors, basically functioning as unpaid wedding staff. When David arrived at the venue, I watched the other groomsmen look him up and down, taking in his simple black suit from a department store, his understated watch, his quiet demeanor. During the ceremony, everything felt wrong. I stood at the altar in that awful dress, watching my sister marry a man who had already made it clear he thought my husband was beneath his notice. The photographer seemed to go out of his way to minimize me in the family photos. And when it came time for the reception, I discovered that David and I had been seated at what was literally called the kids' table, even though I was 32 years old and the bride's only sister. The breaking point came during the speeches. Richard's best man, emboldened by champagne and the crowd's laughter, decided to get creative with his toast. "Marriage is all about finding your perfect match," he said, grinning at our table. "Some people get lucky and upgrade their whole life, while others—" He let the sentence hang there, eyes deliberately finding David and me. "Well, let's just say love is blind, right?" The room erupted in laughter. My husband sat perfectly still, his face unreadable, while I felt something break inside my chest. I couldn't take it anymore. The laughter from that cruel joke was still echoing around the room when I pushed back my chair, ready to walk out and never look back. My face was burning with humiliation, and I could feel tears threatening to spill over. 3 years of marriage, and this was the first time my family had met David in a formal setting like this. This was their first impression, their judgment of the man I loved, and they had turned it into a public mockery. But as I stood to leave, I felt David's gentle hand on my arm. "Serena," he said quietly, "sit down for just one moment, please." There was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Not anger, not hurt, but a kind of calm certainty that made me pause. David never caused scenes. He never raised his voice. He was the most peaceful man I'd ever known, which was exactly why watching him be humiliated like this was breaking my heart. But now, as he stood up slowly, there was a different energy about him. The room was still buzzing with conversation and laughter. When David walked over to the DJ booth, I watched in confusion as he politely asked for the microphone. The DJ looked puzzled, but handed it over, and suddenly, David's voice filled the room. "Excuse me, everyone. I'm sorry to interrupt." His voice was calm, steady, the same gentle tone he used when he was explaining something complex at work that I suddenly realized I knew very little about. I rarely talk about what I do for a living because I've always believed that actions speak louder than words. The room began to quiet down, more out of curiosity than respect. Richard's best man was still smirking, clearly expecting some kind of awkward thank you speech from the quiet guy they'd been mocking all evening. David pulled out his phone with the casual confidence of someone making a dinner reservation. "I hope you'll forgive me for making a business call during your celebration, but something just occurred to me." He dialed a number, and in the silence of the room, we could all hear it ringing. "Hi, Sarah. It's David. I hope I'm not calling too late." He paused, listening, and I could see people starting to lean forward, trying to understand what was happening. "Yes, I'm actually at an event right now at the Meridian Grand Ballroom. You know, the venue we looked at last month for the charity gala." My heart started beating faster. "Charity gala? What charity gala?" "That's right, this location. I've been thinking about our conversation regarding expansion opportunities, and I'd like to make an offer on this property tonight, if possible." The change in the room was immediate and electric. I watched as the venue manager, who had been discreetly supervising the event from the sidelines, suddenly straightened up and began walking quickly toward our table. His face had gone completely white. "Mr. Chen," the manager said, his voice carrying across the now silent room. "Mr. David Chen. Sir, I had no idea you were attending an event here this evening. If I had known—" David smiled politely and held up one finger, still on his phone call. "Sarah, the property manager is here now. Could you patch me through to the acquisitions team? I think we should move quickly on this one." I watched Richard's face transform from confusion to something approaching panic as the venue manager approached him directly. "Sir," the manager whispered urgently to Richard, "do you know who that man is? That's David Chen. He owns the entire Chen Hospitality Group. He's worth billions." The words hit the room like a physical blow. I could literally see the shockwave move through the crowd as people began whispering frantically to each other. Richard's best man, who had been so smug just moments before, now looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. But David wasn't finished. David ended his phone call with the same quiet dignity he brought to everything else. But the room had completely transformed. Where minutes before there had been condescending laughter and dismissive glances, now there was absolute silence, broken only by frantic whispers. I watched my sister's face cycle through confusion, realization, and then something that looked like pure terror as the magnitude of what had just happened began to sink in. "I apologize for the interruption," David said, his voice still calm, as he handed the microphone back to the DJ. "I don't usually discuss business at social events, but sometimes circumstances call for exceptions." Richard's mother, who had been so dismissive of us just hours earlier, was now staring at David like she was trying to solve an impossible puzzle. The same woman who had made snide comments about our grounded lifestyle was frantically whispering to her husband, probably trying to calculate exactly how much money she had just insulted. But what happened next was the part that will stay with me forever. David walked back to our table, pulled out my chair, like the gentleman he'd always been, and then addressed the room one final time. "I want to thank the Williams family for welcoming me into their lives 3 years ago," he said, his eyes finding my mother, then Jasmine, then settling on me with the same loving look he gave me every morning over coffee. "Serena has always been the most genuine, hardworking, and kind person I've ever known. She chose to live modestly, not because she had to, but because she values substance over show. That's exactly why I fell in love with her. The room was so quiet, you could hear people breathing. David continued, I've been fortunate in business, and with that fortune comes responsibility. Over the past few years, I've quietly helped several family members with their endeavors. I paid for Marcus's medical school tuition, helped Aunt Linda with her mortgage when she was struggling, and provided the seed money for Cousin James's restaurant. I saw several family members' faces go pale as they realized what he was saying. My cousin Marcus, who had been laughing at the earlier jokes, now looked like he wanted to disappear. Aunt Linda, who had made comments about David being too quiet to be successful, was gripping her husband's arm so tightly, her knuckles were white. I was also planning a special surprise for the newlyweds, David said, his tone still conversational, but with an edge that made everyone lean in. I own several resorts in the Maldives, and I had arranged for Richard and Jasmine to have their honeymoon at our newest property. Completely complimentary, of course, with all amenities included. The reservation was made under my personal account. Jasmine made a small sound that might have been a gasp or a sob. The honeymoon she'd been bragging about for months, the one she said was beyond anything normal people could afford, had been a gift from the husband she'd spent the evening mocking. However, David said, and this time his voice carried just enough steel to make it clear he wasn't the pushover everyone thought he was. After tonight's festivities, I think that gift would be better used elsewhere. Serena, would you like to spend next weekend at the Maldives Spa Resort instead? You've been working so hard lately. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see Richard frantically calculating what this meant for their planned honeymoon, while Jasmine looked like she was about to be sick. But David wasn't finished delivering consequences. As for the other family investments I mentioned, he said, his tone still perfectly polite, I think it's time I reassessed where my support would be most appreciated and most effective. In one quiet, dignified response, my husband had just completely restructured our family's financial landscape. And the most beautiful part? He'd done it all without raising his voice, without being cruel, without stooping to their level. He'd simply shown them exactly who they had chosen to humiliate. And that, my friends, is how karma works when you least expect it. 6 months later, I ran into my cousin at a coffee shop, and he told me something that honestly made my day. He said that night at the wedding changed everything for our family. People started treating each other with more respect, stopped making assumptions based on appearances, and realized that you never really know someone's full story. David and I, we're doing better than ever. We started a foundation together that provides scholarships for underprivileged kids who want to go into business or hospitality. It turns out my quiet, humble husband had been planning this for years. He just needed the right partner to help him make it happen. We're still living in the same modest house, still driving reasonable cars, still choosing substance over show. The only difference is that now our family understands that those choices come from strength, not limitation. As for Jasmine and Richard, their marriage hit some rough patches when the reality of their financial situation became clear without David's planned support. But here's the thing about real family. Even after everything that happened, David eventually did help them, just not in the way they expected. He offered Richard a position, managing one of his smaller properties, and Jasmine had to swallow her pride and accept that her big sister's husband was actually her lifeline, not her competition. The most beautiful part of this whole story isn't the revenge or the dramatic revelation. It's that David taught our entire family something invaluable that night. Never judge someone by their quiet demeanor, their modest lifestyle, or their choice to stay humble. The most powerful people in the room are often the ones who don't need to prove it to anyone. So if this story moved you, if it reminded you of a time when you saw karma work its magic, or if you just love seeing justice served with a side of class and dignity, smash that like button right now. Seriously, let me know in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone completely underestimate the wrong person? Have you seen quiet confidence triumph over loud arrogance? I read every single comment, and I love hearing your stories. And listen, if you enjoyed this journey of family drama, hidden identities, and ultimate justice, you need to subscribe with notifications turned on because I share stories like this every week. Real people, real situations, real karma coming full circle in the most unexpected ways. Trust me, you don't want to miss what I'm sharing next week. It involves a teacher, a classroom full of bullies, and a parent-teacher conference that nobody saw coming. Until next time, remember, never underestimate the quiet ones. They might just surprise you in ways you never imagined.